Welcome to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio. Online at fppradio.com. Today is Wednesday, July 1st. Tomorrow is Independence Day. And no, I'm not confused. Tomorrow actually is Independence Day. July 4th was the day that the Declaration of Independence was signed, but July 2nd was the day that the Continental Congress actually declared independence from Great Britain. And I will post something linking over to that fact because it's something that you don't really learn in school, and that's what I like doing, is teaching you weird random things. And one of the ways that I do that is through the Ask Me Anything. And I've got 3 related questions this week, and on the surface they are very easy to answer. But I don't want to give just a surface answer to these questions. So let me give you backstory before I read the question. So one of my friends that was at the Porcupine Freedom Festival, a.k.a. PorcFest, posted on Facebook yesterday that her and the guy that she drove from Mississippi with got pulled over in the state of New York on Interstate 88 for failure to pull over. And that sounds absurd, right? Like, I'm pulling you over because you didn't pull over. Well, what had happened, she wrote in a comment, was that the police officer had someone pulled over. And New York state law dictates that you have to pull over into the farther lane when you pass a state trooper that has someone pulled over. They did not know this, and of course the cop says that's no excuse. She does say that they slowed down and pulled slightly over, but they did not pull completely into the other lane. So the questions are, how many states and which states have this law? Does such a ticket count against your insurance? And is there a way to successfully fight this from out of state? So, like I said, these sound like very simple questions, and I can answer them by saying all, yes, and probably not. But that doesn't really relay any information about this law and the history of this law and why do we have such a law. So what I did was a fairly thorough search on the internet, came across AAA.com. And they actually have, these things are called move-over laws. And there's 2 kind of parts to the move-over law. The first part is if you're driving down the street and an emergency vehicle comes up behind you and they've got their lights on. It can be a fire truck, an ambulance, a police officer, whatever, any kind of emergency vehicle. You must slow down and move out of their way. That's one part of the move-over law. The other part of the move-over law, and this varies from state to state, so I will post the link to both what the AAA has as well as a website called moveoverlaws.com where they have some more information. But AAA, they give just like a summary of the various things. And the other part, instead of just, like you're driving down the street and somebody comes up behind you, pull down, move out of the way. The other part is if you're driving and they are stopped. So let's just say you're driving down a 2-lane road. And it does matter whether you're on a 2-lane road or something that's a multi-lane road, because if you're on just a 2-lane road, you obviously cannot go into the other lane of traffic legally to avoid the vehicle that's pulled off to the side. So you must slow down, and the level to which you must slow down varies from state to state and situation to situation. So if you're on the interstate, like what happened with my friend, I believe New York state law says that you slow down to at least 20 miles an hour below the speed limit if you are not able to move over into the other lane. And there are various reasons and situations that you could not be able to move over into another lane. And I'll get into that in just a little bit as part of the way to fight this. But again, I don't know how you could fight it from out of state. So you might actually have to go back to New York, but that would be more costly than just paying the $275 ticket. And then I think it is 3 points on the license. So however much that bumps up the insurance. But if it's one of these things to where you're getting close to being what they call the habitual offender, and I don't know if every state has this, but New Hampshire does, to where if you commit so many traffic infractions in a certain length of time, they will put you in jail for 1 year. So in New York, let me just pull up and tell you what the move over, or actually what AAA has under their move over laws. Drivers traveling in the same direction must exercise due care, including moving from a lane immediately adjacent and reducing speed to avoid colliding with a vehicle that is parked, stopped, or standing on the shoulder or any portion of the highway when the vehicle is an authorized emergency response vehicle, tow truck, or maintenance vehicle with its lights flashing. And of course, again, you can't in every situation pull over to the next lane because there might be cars over there. So that would mean you then have to slow down to 20 miles below, or 20 miles per hour below the speed limit, which then causes more of a traffic problem. But I'll get to that in just a bit about, like the whole reason we have this and why we need it. Because everything, there's always a reason, right? Sometimes the reason is somebody's a busybody and they want to control your life. Other times there's actually more legitimate reasons, but it's still not a great reason. So I'll get into that in just a moment. But there is one place in the United States that's not one of the territories that does not have this move over law. And if you were paying attention, you can guess, yes, it's Washington, D.C., because every state has a pullover law, but Washington, D.C. is not a state. And as of the time that I am recording this, which is July 1st, 2015, according to AAA.com as well as MoveOverLaws.com, there is no such law in the District of Criminals. So now let me go over to some of the information that they have from MoveOverLaws.com. And they've got a section titled Facts, Figures, and Articles. And there's, I'm not going to say a lengthy article, but there is an article that I'm going to get to that gives the history of the move over laws. But first, let me give you some of the facts and figures. In 2003, according to MoveOverLaws.com, in 2005, 390 workers were killed and struck by incidents, according to the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health. And I'll give you some more info on this. And do these laws actually wind up helping anybody? Stay tuned.
You can support FPP Radio by joining the Fans program. Fans are friends, allies, and Numery supporters. Fans help FPP afford to produce more original content. You can join the Fans program for as little as $3 per month or any amount of Bitcoin per month, thanks to the recurring payment options provided by Coinbase. To learn more or to join the Fans program, visit fans.fppradio.com. Coinbase is a simple and secure online Bitcoin wallet for sending, receiving, and storing Bitcoin. Coinbase also allows you to buy and sell Bitcoin using a bank account or use their tools to accept Bitcoin as a merchant. Coinbase has more than 1 million consumer wallets and is trusted by over 25,000 merchants, including Overstock.com, Khan Academy, Reddit, and of course, FPP. Get started at coinbase.fppradio.com. In 2115 New England, there are no borders, no states, and no regulations, yet never has a more peaceful and prosperous place existed. But Mr. Drake's security company has seen better days. Faced with the prospect of waning power, Mr. Drake intends to replace the anarchy of New England with a government. But at what cost? And can anyone stop him? Anarchy in New England by Joe Jarvis is available from Amazon.com and all major bookstores.
Welcome back to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio. Online at fppradio.com. Speaking of helping people, that's what the fine folks down at Roberts & Roberts Brokerage do. They help you buy and sell your investment-grade precious metals, and they've been doing so since 1977. They now take Bitcoin for precious metal purchases and have permanently removed the minimum purchase amount for all orders paid in the digital currency. Call Roberts & Roberts Brokerage today for knowledgeable advice on investing and a forward-thinking approach to new technologies. 850-478-5270 or visit them online at rrbi.co. That's rrbi.co. So, going back to some of the history and figures and statistics about these move-over laws, and really, are they anything other than revenue generation? Do they actually wind up saving lives? Why do we need this? Well, according to Move Over America, or actually it's the Move Over America campaign with the website moveoverlaws.com, they write, the American Safety Commission urges drivers to move over, slow down for tow trucks. Every year, first responders across the country are injured or killed on the job while providing emergency services along America's highways. The Move Over laws aim to make all roadside emergency and maintenance professionals safer. Who? 90% of respondents in a national poll by Mason-Dixon Polling and Research, sponsored by NSC, and I'm not sure who NSC is. I'm guessing like the National Safety something Commission, probably. 90% of respondents to the poll by Mason-Dixon Polling and Research believe traffic stops and roadside emergencies are dangerous for law enforcement and first responders. 86% of the respondents support enacting move-over laws in all 50 states. And again, as I've talked before about polls, you can ask a question in any kind of way to get the result you want. And according to another statistic that I saw, even though there are already these laws in all 50 states, 70% of respondents had no clue that there was such a law, or if they did, they didn't know the details of such a law. Like my friend that asked the question, she knew that you were supposed to slow down and, kind of pull out of the way, didn't know that you were supposed to go completely into the other lane, hence getting the ticket and hence asking this question. According to moveoverlaws.com, they now ask the question, what? The move-over law, effective in all 50 states, requires drivers approaching a stationary emergency or maintenance vehicle with flashing lights to move to the next adjacent lane if it is safe to do so, and if it is not possible, to reduce their speed. That being, if it's not possible to move over into the next lane. Each state has their own set of consequences, and failure to comply can result in fines, license suspension, or even jail time. Why? They ask. Over 150 U.S. law enforcement officers have been killed since 1999 after being struck by vehicles along America's highways, according to the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund. When? South Carolina was the first state to enact such a law in 1996. Hawaii was the most recent in 2012. How did it all get started? Well, a paramedic in South Carolina by the name of James Garcia writes, quote, It all started around 6:30 a.m. on the cold, dark morning of January 24th, 1994, on Highway 6 between Gilbert and Lexington, South Carolina. While I was working at an MVA, a Dodge van came flying around the scene. Although the driver had slowed down from 55 to 45, he was still driving too fast, distracted, and was looking at the accident. I actually remember the expression on the driver's face when he hit me. Our eyes met briefly as he turned his head forward, and I smashed into his windshield and bounced off and over his van. My left leg and arm were broken in the accident. I sincerely have to tell you, it really hurt a lot. I'm glad I lived, but to this day I know hours in advance when it's going to rain. I feel fortunate to have survived the injuries and maintained my EMS career, but will always remain skittish when working at MVAs. MVA being a term for motor vehicle accident. There was nothing in South Carolina or any other state at the time, he writes, that made EMS any more than a regular pedestrian at their own risk on the highway. Some states had Emergency Powers Act provisions for fire and police, but even those rules were limited, fragmented, and did not address emergency scenes. There were plenty of laws about what to do when an emergency vehicle was en route to a scene, but nothing about what happens once they arrived. I spent the next year working with our state legislature, and in March of 1996, the country's first move-over law was passed. Then they have an article here about basically the law, and it's titled, "There Ought to Be a Law." And whenever somebody says there ought to be a law, you have to ask yourself, is this something that you are willing to enforce with the threat of death? Because that's what every law is backed up by. Now, they might say, well, no, it's only a $275 fine. Okay, sure. It's only a $275 fine. But what happens if the person can't pay or refuses to pay? Well, if they can't pay or they refuse to pay, then they go to jail. Okay, and what happens if they refuse to go to jail? Well, then, I guess they do wind up getting killed by the police. Yes, that's what happens. If you are adamant enough to resist arrest for whatever the offense, you could wind up being killed. So, the next time you think there ought to be a law, ask yourself, are you willing? Not are you willing to ask someone else to kill someone that violates it. Are you, personally, you, the person listening to my voice right now, are you willing to kill someone to make them comply with whatever it is that you want them to do? And I say no. I don't think that anybody should be killed or threaten to be killed to just be a person. Like, you want to drive down the street, as long as you don't harm anybody, fine, go for it. As soon as you do something that causes a victim, then there can be some sort of justice. But this whole pre-crime sort of thing, and that's really what this move-over law is. It's pre-crime. Because, well, you could have hit the police officer, but I didn't. So my friend that was driving down the interstate moved halfway over into the other lane, slowed down. They got pulled over and given a ticket because of what might have happened. So now that you know why there's the law, does it actually make the police safer? I've already said 70% of people surveyed have no clue that these laws even exist. So does it make anybody safer? And what can be a defense against this if you wind up getting one of these tickets? Stay tuned. There's more on Peace, Love, Liberty Radio.
During the 2013 Porcupine Freedom Festival, Davy Barker presented an idea for a renegade psychological experiment. Since then, he has refined his idea and put his plan and research into writing. He explains, "We aim to show the world beyond a shadow of a doubt that power corrupts absolutely and corrupt authority deserves no obedience." Authoritarian Sociopathy is available from Amazon.com, all major bookstores, and now available as an audiobook.
It is the year 91,001 BCE. Witness humanity's origins in Hyperchronius, a classic role-playing game for Windows PCs with a story like no other game before. A liberty-oriented experience that is not to be missed. Go to zog.ninja to get your copy of Hyperchronius today. Use the code FPP to get $1 off. Hyperchronius, zog.ninja, code FPP.
You can support FPP Radio by shopping online. Whether you're looking for precious metals, bitcoins, or books, you'll find that and more at shop.fppradio.com. Every purchase you make from one of my affiliates, like Namecheap, ExpressCoin, and Amazon, at shop.fppradio.com helps fund FPP Radio. Or you can shop directly from FPP with Bitcoin in the Bitcoin store. That's shop.fppradio.com.
Welcome back to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio. Online at fppradio.com. I'll get back to this whole move over law stuff. Does it make police and emergency workers safer? What is a good defense if you get one of these tickets? I've got answers to that. But first, I want to make sure that I tell you about Survivor Max by Davi Barker. Max is 11 years old. He must survive the zombie apocalypse alone in New Hampshire. The slow-moving, non-thinking lame brains swarm his home searching for living flesh. Max must apply his Porcupine Freedom Scouts training to plan his escape, but first, he must prove that he's too smart to die. Look for Survivor Max on Facebook and Amazon, or read Chapter 1 for free at survivormax.com. That's survivormax.com. So, do these move-over laws make people safer? And, well, the information is actually going to surprise you. But before I answer that question, what is a good defense if you get one of these tickets? Well, I actually found a lawyer who has on his website, attackthatticket.com, he has a defense that you can use. And it's actually a pretty good defense if you think about it for a moment. And he writes, he has the text of the statute or the law, well, whatever it is you want to call it in New York. He's got the text of that. And then he says the elements of the move over statute. In order for a violation to occur, an emergency vehicle must, 1, be stationary on a highway shoulder or the road itself, 2, be operating at least one red or combination red-white light. When these two conditions are met, the motorist is under a duty to exercise due care to avoid colliding with an authorized emergency vehicle. The words here are very important. Exercise due care to avoid colliding. The statute, he writes, then goes on to create an affirmative duty when driving on a highway to, at a minimum, move from a lane which contains or is immediately adjacent to the shoulder where such emergency vehicle is. However, despite this requirement, a driver is nonetheless prohibited from moving over unless the movement complies with the requirements of VTL, which is Vehicle Something Law, Chapter 11, including but not limited to Sections 1110 and 1128 of the title. In other words, he writes, when on a highway, a motorist must move over at least one lane, but only if it is safe to do so and in compliance with all other rules/laws of the road, but specifically Sections 1110A and Section 1128. Defense to the move over law. He writes, as one can clearly see, the statute is written in such a way that leaves it open to numerous exceptions and defenses. To further analyze, we must take a closer look at the other sections that are mentioned, Section 1110 and 1128. Section 1110 requires the driver to obey traffic control devices, i.e. road markings, lines, signs, etc. So, for example, if a motorist were required to cross over a double yellow line in order to comply, the motorist would be prohibited from moving over. Also, you cannot cross over a single white line. That's something that most people don't know. A single white line means don't cross over. But I see people do it all the time. New York VTL 1128 is the law of lane changes. So whatever laws there are that regulate lane changes, so signaling before a certain number of feet, etc. He then writes, the first thing to note in New York, and again, I'm talking about New York here because this is where the incident happened that spawned the question. New York 1128 is written subjectively, not objectively. In other words, it does not say that the driver can change lanes when reasonably prudent, but that he can only do so when the driver first ascertains that movement can be safely made. The wording of the statute implies that the burden is on the driver from the driver's viewpoint of when it is safe to move, not to an objectively reasonable person. So, therefore, the driver can say, I didn't think it was safe to move completely over, or I didn't have time from the time that I saw the vehicle to get completely into the other lane. He then says a second prong to the defense is that the driver must first ascertain that it is safe to move over. In other words, it could have been totally safe, but there was not enough time for the motorist to realize it. So, that's how you offer the defense, but what about the reason? And the question was actually, can you defend it from out of state? And I don't think you can. Every court case I've ever had, I've had to go to court unless I had a lawyer present, and there was one situation that I will not get into the details of where I was not able to attend. My lawyer was. I teleconferenced into the court. And no, if you ask the question during an Ask Me Anything, I will still not go into details of what that case was. But I will say that I prevailed and everything is expunged. So from emergencymanagement.com, it's actually emergencymgmt.com. They have an article here with info on crash data. And this is really what my line of thinking is. Okay, there's a law that's supposed to prevent X. Does that law actually prevent X? And let's look just for 2 seconds at the drug war. No, the drug war does not prevent people from using drugs, buying, selling, possessing, manufacturing, whatever, any illegal substance. In fact, the drug war is an absolute failure. More people are using, more people are abusing, more people are in jail now than when this horrible thing started. So with this move over law, is it anything other than revenue generation? No, not really. From Emergency Management here, they write, the Emergency Responder Safety Institute, a national advisory group of public safety and transportation experts, estimates that on average 6 to 8 fire, rescue, and EMS workers are killed working in or near moving traffic each year, as are 10 to 12 police officers. The Institute says that about 50 tow truck operators are killed. It doesn't break out how many of those cases involve victims who were struck because of move-over violations. Further, there is no comprehensive statistics on emergency and roadside workers who die or are seriously injured on highways because motorists fail to move over. No single governmental body is responsible for collecting and maintaining that information. A 2013 study prepared by the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials found that near misses and deaths of those who work in and around highways are reported in different ways. And according to this and other charts, no, the number of deaths, they're staying about the same. It's not helping, it's not hurting. Hey, this is Peace, Love, Liberty Radio. Don't forget, every Wednesday I answer your questions AMA at FPVradio.com.